Now as soon as it was morning, the assembly of all the chief priests, scribes, and the elders of the people gathered together, and they led him away into their council, saying, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you won't believe, and if I ask, you will in no way answer me or let me go. From now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." They all said, "Are you then the Son of God?" He said to them, "You say it, because I am." They said, "Why do we need any more witness? For we ourselves have heard from his own mouth." Immediately they held a council against and bound and carried Jesus away, to put him to death, from Caiaphas into the Praetorium. They led him away and delivered him up to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Then Judas, who betrayed him, when he saw that Jesus was condemned, felt remorse, and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, "I have sinned in that I betrayed innocent blood." But they said, "What is that to us? You see to it." He threw down the pieces of silver in the sanctuary and departed. He went away and hanged himself. The chief priests took the pieces of silver and said, "It's not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is the price of blood." They took counsel and bought the potter's field with them, to bury strangers in. Therefore that field was called the field of blood to this day. Then that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled, saying, "They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him upon whom a piece had been set, whom some of the children of Israel priced, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me." It was early, and the whole company of them rose up and brought him before Pilate. They themselves didn't enter into the Praetorium, that they may not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. Pilate therefore went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man weren't an evildoer, we wouldn't have delivered him up to you." Pilate therefore said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." Therefore the Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death," that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he should die. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man perverting the nation, forbidding paying taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Pilate, the governor, therefore entered again into the Praetorium, called Jesus, asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Do you say this by yourself, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight, that I wouldn't be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered him, "So you say that I am a king? For this reason I have been born, and for this reason I have come into the world, that I should testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" When he had said this, he went out again to the Jews. He was accused by the chief priests and elders of many things. He answered nothing. Then Pilate again said to him, "Have you no answer? Don't you hear? See how many things they testify against you?" But Jesus gave him no further answer, not even one word, so that the governor marveled greatly. But they insisted, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee even to this place." But when Pilate heard Galilee mentioned, he asked if the man was a Galilean. When he found out that he was in Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem during those days. Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had wanted to see him for a long time, because he had heard many things about him. He hoped to see some miracle done by him. He questioned him with many words, but he gave no answers. The chief priests and the scribes stood vehemently accusing him. Herod, with his soldiers, humiliated him and mocked him. Dressing him in luxurious clothing, they sent him back to Pilate. Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before they were enemies with each other. Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, "You brought this man to me as one that perverts the people, and see, I have examined him before you. and found no basis for a charge against this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. Neither has Herod, for I sent you to him, and see, nothing worthy of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him." Now at the feast the governor was accustomed to release to the multitude one prisoner whom they asked of him. There was one they had then called Barabbas, a notable prisoner, bound with his fellow insurgents, men who, in the insurrection, one who was thrown into prison for a certain revolt in the city, and had committed murder. When therefore they were gathered together, they all cried out aloud, began to ask him to do as he always did for them, saying, "Away with this man, release to us Barabbas." Then Pilate spoke to them again, wanting to release Jesus, answered them, "I find no basis for a charge against him. But if you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover, therefore, whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ, the King of the Jews?" For he perceived that because of envy the chief priests had delivered him up, but they shouted, saying, "Crucify, crucify him." While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him." He said to them the third time, "Why, what evil has this man done? I have found no capital crime in him. I will therefore chastise him and release him." But now the chief priests and the elders were urgent with loud voices, stirring up the multitudes, that he should release Barabbas to them instead, and destroy Jesus, that he might be crucified. But the governor answered them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" Then they all shouted again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Their voices and the voices of the chief priests prevailed. Pilate again asked them, "What then shall I do to Jesus, who you call Christ, the King of the Jews?" They all cried out to him again, "Crucify him." But Pilate said to them, "Why, what evil has he done?" But they cried out exceedingly, saying, "Crucify him." So when Pilate saw that nothing was being gained, but rather that a disturbance was starting, wishing to please the multitude, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this righteous person. You see to it." All the people answered, "May his blood be on us and on our children." Pilate released to them Barabbas, who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder. To them, for whom they asked, he handed over Jesus up to their will, decreed that what they asked for should be done. So Pilate then took Jesus, and when he had flogged him, he delivered Jesus to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus away within the court, which is the Praetorium, and gathered the whole garrison together against him. They called together the whole cohort. The soldiers stripped him and braided thorns into a crown and put it on his head. They dressed him in purple scarlet robe, a reed in his right hand, and they kneeled down before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they kept slapping him. They began to salute him. They struck his head with a reed and spat on him, and bowing their knees did homage to him. They took the purple robe off him and put his own garments on him, and led him away to crucify him. Then Pilate went out again and said to them, "Behold, I bring him out to you, that you may know that I find no basis for a charge against him." Jesus therefore came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple garment. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When therefore the chief priests and the officers saw him, they started shouting, saying, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." When therefore Pilate heard this saying, he was more afraid. He entered into the Praetorium again, and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Aren't you speaking to me? Don't you know that I have power to release you, and I have power to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power at all against me, unless it were given to you from above. Therefore he who delivered me to you has greater sin." At this, Pilate was seeking to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you aren't Caesar's friend." Everyone who makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." When Pilate therefore heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, at about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So then he delivered him to them to be crucified. They brought him out, bearing his cross. When they led him away to crucify him, they grabbed one Simon of Cyrene, coming from the country, and they compelled him to go with them. They laid on him the cross, that he might carry his cross after Jesus. A great multitude of the people followed him, including women, who also mourned and lamented him. But Jesus turned to them, said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming in which they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to tell the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and tell the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things in the green tree, what will be done in the dry?" So they took Jesus, led away, and crucified him with 2 robbers. There were also others to be put to death. When they came to the place that is called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, they crucified him there. With him 2 others, the criminals, on either side, one on the right hand and on the other on his left, and Jesus in the middle. The scripture was fulfilled, which says, "He was numbered with transgressors." Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." The soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him sour vinegar, wine mixed with myrrh and gall to drink, and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." When he had tasted it, he would not drink. Pilate set up over his head the accusation against him. The title inscription was written over him in letters in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. He put on the cross, "This is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Therefore many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. The chief priests of the Jews therefore said to Pilate, "Don't write, 'the King of the Jews,' but," he said, "I am King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, they divided his clothing among them and made 4 parts, casting lots on them, what each should take, to every soldier a part, and also the coat. Now the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. Then they said to one another, "Let's not tear it, but cast lots for it to decide whose it will be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, 'They parted my garments among them, for my cloak they cast lots.'" Therefore the soldiers did these things. It was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him, and the people stood and sat and watched him there. One of the criminals who was hanged insulted him, saying, "If you are the Christ, save yourself and us." But the other answered, and rebuking him said, "Don't you even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward for our deeds. This man has done nothing wrong." He said to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus said to him, "Assuredly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "Ha! You who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself, for you are the Son of God. Come down from the cross." Likewise also the rulers with chief priests scoffed, and mocking him among themselves with the scribes, the Pharisees, and the elders, saying, "He saved others, but he can't save himself. If he is the Christ, the King of Israel, now let him come down from the cross, that we may see, if this is the Christ of God, his chosen one, we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants him, for he said, 'I am the Son of God.' The robber also, who was crucified with him, cast on him the same reproach, also insulted him. Now from about when the 6th hour had come, darkness came over all the land until the 9th hour. At about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani?" That is interpreted, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of them who stood by there, when they heard it, said, "Behold, this man is calling Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and took a sponge, filling it full of vinegar, and put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. The rest said, "Let him be. Let's see whether Elijah comes to save him and take him down." But there were standing by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Therefore, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." When he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." For that hour the disciple took her to his own home. After this, Jesus, seeing that all things were now finished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, "I am thirsty." Now a vessel full of vinegar was set there, so they put a sponge full of vinegar on hyssop and held it at his mouth. When Jesus therefore had received the vinegar, he cried again with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. It is finished." Having said this, he bowed his head, and he breathed his last, yielding, and gave up his spirit. Behold, the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom. The earth quaked, and the rocks were split. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered into the holy city and appeared to many. Therefore the Jews, because it was the preparation day, so the bodies wouldn't remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a special one, asked of Pilate that their legs might be broken, and that they might be taken away. Therefore the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first, and of the other who was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead. They didn't break his legs. However, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. Now when the centurion saw what was done, who stood by opposite him, saw that he cried out like this and breathed his last, he glorified God, saying, "Certainly this was a righteous man. Truly this man was the Son of God." Those who were with him, watching Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were done, feared exceedingly, saying, "Truly this was the Son of God." He who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, that you may believe. For these things happened, that the scripture might be fulfilled. A bone of him will not be broken. Again, another scripture says, "They will look on him whom they pierced." All the multitudes that came together to see this, when they saw the things that were done, returned home beating their breasts. There were also many women there, watching from afar, who had followed with Jesus, serving him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, the less of Joses, Salome, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee, who, when he was in Galilee, followed him and served him. All his acquaintances and many other who came up with him to Jerusalem stood at a distance watching these things. When evening had now come, after these things, behold, a prominent council member and a rich man, Joseph from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, a good and righteous man, had not consented to their counsel indeed, who himself was also a disciple of Jesus, came looking and waiting for God's kingdom, boldly went to Pilate and asked that he might take away Jesus' body, but secretly for fear of the Jews. Pilate marveled if he were already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he had been dead long. When he found out from the centurion, then Pilate granted permission and commanded the body to be given to Joseph. Joseph came, therefore, and took away his body. Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 Roman pounds. So they bought a clean linen, and taking him down, wound and wrapped Jesus' body, and bound it with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden. Laid it in his own new tomb in the garden, which he had cut out in the stone, a new tomb, in which no man had ever yet been laid. He rolled a great stone against the door of the tomb and departed, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was near at hand. They laid Jesus there. Sabbath was drawing near, and Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary, the mother of Joseph, followed after sitting opposite the tomb, saw where and how he was laid. They returned and prepared spices and ointments.